7 o'clock, yeah. Good evening, everyone. My name is David Freese. I'm the mayor of Tonganoxie. I'm calling to order this January 3rd, 2023 regular meeting of the Tonganoxie City Council. Ms. Huntington, would you call the roll and note that I am here, please?
Yes, Mayor. Mr. Partridge?
Here.
Ms. McCutcheon is absent. Ms. Stevens?
Here.
Mr. Donnelly?
Here.
Mr. Dale?
Here.
Would you join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Item 2 on the agenda is the approval of minutes, where we approve or not the minutes from the previous meeting, this being the December 19th, 2022 meeting. Are there any conversation, questions, or concerns about those minutes? Seeing none, I would accept a motion at this time.
I'd make that motion, Mr. Mayor.
Right, thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Partridge. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Under consent agenda, item 3 on the agenda tonight is the review of bill payments, where we go over the bill payments for the previous time period. Do we see anything that we want to talk about in the bill payments? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to, for the consent agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Under old business tonight, we were going to reconsider the financing strategies for temporary note series 2022C maturing March 1, 2023, because if you see in the minutes, we had 3 members of the governing body that had questions that they wanted a little more information for. So, Mr. Brakovich, I'll turn that over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So we do have a presentation tonight to address the questions that came up at the last meeting. And Ben Hart with Baker Tilly's here again this evening. Ben serves as the city's financial advisor. And like I said, we do have a brief presentation. I just want to do a couple of introductory remarks about it. We spent a lot of time talking about infrastructure projects. I think we've got in the presentation a timeline that kind of goes back into, and I know we spent time before that, but this year in the budget cycle, starting in May with the CMIP discussion, we had about 8 budget workshops where we pretty much touched on some level of infrastructure at each of those meetings. And I know that Mr. Partridge came on the council kind of after we had completed the project, so it was kind of an attempt to itemize the meetings that we had and what we talked about, and if anybody wanted reference material, we could certainly offer it. But what we're really trying to go there is the step back from the item we're going to consider tonight, which is how to refinance that temp note for the water tower. We looked at a variety of funding sources. So we'll talk about a lot of them tonight. But one of the things that we wanted to look at was cash on hand. And we knew that we had ARPA funds that were going to be available. We knew that we had some fund balance funds in excess of our set policy goals in terms of the percentage that we were trying to maintain. And we also knew that we were going to have a new utility revenue customer coming online, and what were the forecasts or projections associated with that, and including a range from a disaster happens and the project never comes online and that utility user isn't using any water or sewer, versus kind of pie in the sky or bigger projections than what we estimated. So you'll see an update on that tonight. But ultimately, I think the discussion that we got to on the current temp notes, why did we go that route? And that was back in the early part of 22 at latter part of 21 was we didn't quite have a solid number on the total cost of the water tower project. We had a letter of award for the 1.5 million and some change grant that we had from the EDA, but we didn't have the final confirmation that those funds were going to come through. And based on that discussion, it was determined to move forward with a temporary note at an amount of, I know we'll show it later, but I believe it was about 2.7, 2.8 million. And we're going to show how much that cost us to borrow almost $3 million for a year. So I don't want to do the spoiler alert on that, but that was a cost associated with that move. But what that allowed us to do was then we were able to issue an RFP, see what the true cost of the water tower was. The EDA grant was finalized. We're receiving reimbursement on that project now. So now we have a clearer picture on cost, but that one piece that's still not there is that end user, new utility customer still isn't online with their operations, and so we're not seeing that, so we're gonna have to use some projections on that. But really what that led us to were then the two options that we were focused on, or really three, but the two that we discussed most at the last meeting was to take out that current temp note. Do we want to issue another short-term temp note for maybe 2 years to allow that utility customer to come online so that we can get a proven revenue stream for water and sewer from that? Or do we look at a short-term lease purchase with a banking institution that would give us an ability to pay off that lease purchase early without any penalties associated? And what would the interest rates be on those? And we have a slide that shows the difference in those two funding options. I mentioned that maybe there's a third option, and that third option could be some cash that's on hand, whether it's in the city's own sales and special sales tax for infrastructure, or our capital projects, which is funded by the share of the county sales tax that's remitted back to the cities. And we've got some figures that we can share with you should we go back there. The last thing I'll say, and I don't want to steal too much of the presentation's thunder, but one option we talked about through the budget work sessions and all the way up to even last week is, did we want to use some of our cash, if we're going to issue debt, to buy down some of that debt? And that's a concept we've presented numerous times through budget work sessions, and it doesn't really seem like it was getting a lot of traction. And so we did not include that with a lot of our analysis this evening. So again, I wanted to just throw those opening comments out, try to framework what we're going to focus on. I hope we've come back with answers to the questions that were presented, to give you at least a platform where hopefully you feel like you have enough data to make a good policy level decision. So with that, I'd be happy to turn it over to Mr. Porter, and then I think Mr. Hart has some discussion points as well.
Okay, a couple slides forward, Lindsay. Thank you, George. A couple more. Right there, yeah. So just a refresher on the 2022 C temp notes. Those were to finance the $3.299 million construction cost of the water tower that's currently under construction. Like George mentioned, the grant subsequently received by the city and confirmation of the award did knock that total cost to the city down from the full cost of 3.299 down to 1.790 million. The temp note that was issued was for a financing value of just over 2.845 million. And at the time, the interest rate, true interest cost assigned to that borrowing to give us that financial flexibility to cash finance the project and later reimburse ourselves with the grant proceeds for the share of support we received from the EDA grant was 8.829%, which is a little over $23,000. That matures this March 1st, and so as Mr. Hart will share in a couple slides, we'll talk about the timeliness of needing to make a decision on how to proceed looking at medium or longer term financing options before March 1st. Next slide, please. So talking about some of the cash funding options and cash levels, 2023's projected year-end fund balance, which does depend on revenue and expense assumptions in the 2023 budget, shows that in the infrastructure sales tax fund, which has a limited set of purposes allowed, the city does have just under $1 million in cash on hand built up since 2017 in that funding source. In our share of the county sales tax and the capital projects fund, we still have projections after completing Church Street Bridge, which is also well underway, as you're aware. We still project to have a little more than 1.275 million in share of the county sales tax currently unencumbered. That also has limited restrictions on the use of funds, but infrastructure, even water and sewer infrastructure, is an eligible option for that, just like bridges, equipment, and city facilities. What we wanted to highlight on this slide is, in essence, you're looking at those two funding sources in the middle of the slide as about 2.27 million in cash on hand. Now, they're not from the utilities that the water tower directly supports, water and sewer utilities, but they are eligible options that could allow us to forego incurring any interest cost beyond the point we've already encumbered through the temp notes that finance the project construction contract. When we look at the utility funds, a couple things that are trends or highlights we wanted to identify, and we'll look at on the next slide in particular, are when we look at our projections based on adding a new substantial customer, our immediate need to build up fund balances from the levels they're at today is due to the fact that those two utilities, water and sewer, grow in scope. So our fund balance target is currently 30% of revenue for water and sewer. So thus, as our revenue expectations go up, fund balance demands go up. And so that'll explain some of the movement you'll see on the next slide. From that point on, bullet point two, number two, you do see more linear growth, and that corresponds with the scenarios that we projected for you. So we'll move on to talk more about that in more detail, but any questions on the other two funding sources? Okay, next slide, please, Lindsay. So this graph illustrates 4 different scenarios, and what it's intended to impact or to show is the impact on fund balance levels beyond our reserve target requirements of 30% of revenue for the utility, and this is for the water fund in particular. The sewer fund doesn't look exactly the same, but just to give you some context, we're illustrating the water fund, water operations fund. So the 4 scenarios illustrated include new usage of 0. I think it was discussed last meeting as a catastrophic failure. The city's newest user in the business park fails to open, fails to maintain membership in our utility customer base. That is illustrated in the gray bar on the chart, and you can see fund balance in excess of fund balance targets for the next for this current year and 2 future years, as well as 2022's ending fund balance level of just under 400,000 in funds available. The next scenario is 3 million gallons of usage a month and being added to the utility, and that is our contractual requirement baseline with our newest customer at the business park starting this year. 6 million is our budget assumption. It's a conservative assumption that's still lower than what we've been given and projected usage from the new company, and then 8 million is closely aligned with what the real projections offered by our newest customer at the business park are for usage and demand. So what you can see illustrated there again is in 2023 you don't see a large shift, and that doesn't mean we're not collecting more revenue from our customers. It is. It's just we're incurring additional costs for purchasing water and treating sewer, and we're also allocating a larger share of our annual revenue to reserves because the reserve level grows as the utility financial structure grows. In 2024, you can see the first departure from scenario to scenario in excess revenue available, and so those range from a high of just under 925,000 to a low scenario of 668,000. In 2024. Moving on into the next year, you see additional growth forecasted. And again, that is based on conservative assumptions. Higher than probably likely treatment costs, accurate purchase costs, and other factors that we formulated for this analysis. The goal of this slide is really to show you that 2023 funds on hand is expected to be pretty static at close to 400,000. So that obviously doesn't allow us to meet the full cost of 1.7 million for this debt obligation in 1 year from this funding source. But what it also is intended to show is that linear growth from starting in 2024 in cash on hand is anticipated to be almost enough in the scenario in the green bar by 2025 to meet the obligations of 1.7 million. And in concert with other funding sources, the sewer fund and our water and sewer capital funds, we do anticipate that there will be more multiple options of financing sources for this project. This also doesn't factor in, though, analysis of every future capital improvement need. We expect those will occur as we go forward in future years. But what it is anticipated is that within a 2 to 3 year window, the water fund alone should have the capacity to repay the majority or the entirety of 1.7 million for this water tower project. Are there any questions about that information before we let Mr. Hart take over?
I do have one quick question.
Yes, please.
These numbers, I assume, are year-end numbers, right?
are.
So won't the 2024 number be more applicable to a 3/1/25 maturity date?
It would, yes. Those would be the funds by the end of the year, yes.
Say that again.
The 2024 numbers to me are the most important because that's what we would have when the notes actually mature.
And then, so in essence, in 2024, we have about 400,000, 500,000 more than we have today,
In the water fund,
based
yeah.
on based on policy. Now, I will get my zing out that we don't follow. We will have about 500,000 more, and we could utilize, and what Mr. Parker was just saying, that's the real number when the maturity comes around. Okay.
That's our cash situation at that time.
But if we follow the policy, that number would be slightly less because we're gonna have more revenue and more requirement to hold a higher balance.
And this
Wanna make
factors
sure we
in
get
that
that out
growth.
there.
This illustration shows taking into account that policy growing.
Yeah. So the
It's not
graph,
free, it wouldn't be free, I guess it is free. 'cause
This
we could
is,
spend
yeah.
it down to zero. Yeah,
Yeah.
if we wanted to. Okay, very good. Thank
Yeah,
you.
these numbers can all be spent without violating policy in future years according to the projections.
Yep.
And this is just the Water Operations Fund too, just wanted to remind everyone. We did analysis for multiple funding sources, but it's sort of a lot to share all at once, so we highlighted the main fund. I think we'll turn it to the next slide unless there's any
I got
questions.
one quick more about.
Yes.
When it just says on here, net of available cash, what, do we have does the city have a recommendation for what the available cash would be?
Well, depending on funding source, today's, 2022 year end, 2023 starting is in that neighborhood of 400,000 in this funding source. And then, like I mentioned on, I think the last slide, we're at about 2.27 million in sales tax from the county and the city's infrastructure sales tax. But those aren't probably the most preferred funding sources.
Okay, so does that mean like a $1.3 million bond issue or still 1.7?
Those are options that we
Okay.
could
Well,
consider. And Ben,
You're reading ahead.
yeah.
Okay,
Let's
sorry.
go
those
to
are
the next slide.
Very good
Thank you.
questions. Those are very good questions. The next slide, what we're doing is, like George had said earlier, attempted to break down cost for you. That we didn't assume any prepayment, any cash contribution. We just assumed the gross amount. We rounded it to what the bond market would take a look at. The first one up there, the 1.795 note, there's no principal payment on that. This is just carrying the note all the way to the future. It doesn't include any kind of pay down at call or anything like that. So this would be a 2-year note with an ability to pay some portion after 12 months, so a 12-month call. 4% that we've got in there is based on what our competitive rates are right now on temporary notes for 24 months, both in the north, the Midwest, and around the Kansas City and Missouri area. So that's kind of an average with a little bit of padding to it, even though the note here in this case would be a private placement, so a lot of times you get a local bank involved, you might get a better deal than you would out in the competitive market. It's all yet to be seen. But the 144,000 is what the interest cost would be to carry it to maturity. Again, no principal payment on that one. And that's also an annual appropriation note, so there's no collateral behind it, which would be similar to a lease. A lease, you'd have some type of collateral behind it. We issue those all the time in COPs, all the time in Missouri. We're expecting a little basis point bump there. We've got 4.75 and upwards to 5.15. Those are the two bottom rows. The only difference there is the interest cost. The carrying cost to maturity there, again, principal payment here in this case would be level over 5 years, would be around 340,000 on the low side, 378 on the high side. The bottom two I would call cash conservation. In this case, you keep your cash for other projects like we had talked about. I think Councilmember O'Donnell said that rightfully so, you've got other projects coming down the line. What's it going to cost me to hang on to the note and just pay it over time like you would do any other lease? So that's what we added here on that one. That's the total cost, the total interest comparisons on the note and the 5-year lease. Now, it's a little, I'm going to say apples, they're going to say a red apple to a green apple because the 5-year lease is a 5-year lease. The temporary note's only a 2-year note, right? So double that temporary note, if you're going to carry it out for 2 more years, you're looking at 280,000 at 4 years or a little bit more. So it's not going to be as much interest cost only because of the 4% is lower. Last year we enjoyed less than 1% interest cost, which is phenomenal. Here you can see the comparison of what we issued compared to what we've got in front of us, the 144,000. In a typical scenario for a project like this, we've either seen temporary notes issued and then go straight to the bond market, the long-term issuance, or a long-term bond issued to begin with. In this case, we see a lot of the temporary notes and then they roll, if they roll once, maybe once, and then we go long-term 10 to 20 years out. The reason I didn't run that is because of the cash availability you have right now. Knowing what I know from the past discussions of this body, not paying interest to the degree you don't have to pay interest is your friend. And at 4%, these numbers could go up, and I'm assuming they're going to go up 2 years from now. And that also 2 years from now, or even 5 years from now, we can make a decision then on how much you want to pay down. If you've got the cash availability, you could pay it all off or spread it out a little bit, depending on what the interest cost is. That's the interest comparison that you asked for me to bring back. Hopefully that's really where, in line with what you're wanting to see.
Next slide there. Yeah, thank you.
This was displayed too, but I wanted to make sure we went through it again, and Councilmember Partridge had a good question on net available cash. At this point, the recommendation is to move forward with a 2-year note, mature in 2025, March 1st of 2025. The net of available cash is if, like Dan said, if you decide to put anything down. Right now, we're running all assumptions as if we're not putting any money down. We're going to conserve that cash. We're looking at private placement. We've got 2 positive responses back from local banks already. We've got 4 to 6 others that we would actually issue this RFP out. We've got US Bank, who is extremely aggressive at this point, anywhere from Lawrence to Kansas City and right smack in the middle. They're snapping up these shorter term notes on a regular basis and really working with cities on placing these. So they're getting aggressive. UMB, we haven't seen much in the market. Commerce Bank has been in the market, and Country Club Bank's been in the market. But there's the heavy favorites I would suspect are going to be the hometown banks that we see coming in. The way that RFP would look, you can see on the right-hand side that schedule. We actually issued that RFP on the 9th. I believe that's next Monday. We issued the RFP for any kind of return on February 2nd, which is when we would start putting the information together for this body to select a bank. We come to you with a recommendation. Actually, the staff makes a recommendation. We would help them analyze what those responses look like. We'd issue a term sheet, if you will, something simpler for them to fill out and reply back to us. Be a one interest rate, if we did do a 2-year note, be one interest rate across the whole amount. Would also entail any kind of cost of issuance if they needed an underwriter attorney, which in this case, we're looking at these to be non-security. So really, it's just a bank loan, just as simple as possible. That also reduces the cost considerably in this market. Our costs would go down, and I know bond counsel would as well. They're probably going to be the most at this point because of the taxability or non-taxability of the issue. And I know you guys have done that in the past. So that's the cost differential, and then the recommendation that we have. So what we need from this body tonight is either additional discussion or a head nod to move forward for the 9th, and how to move forward.
All right, thank you, sir. Are there questions?
General comment, we know that the rates are really in turmoil. I don't know if you know that or not, but I assure you
they are.
does.
You're
The
right.
interest rates are really, really all over the place. And it's very difficult right now to determine which way rates are moving, and there's risk in that. And
Absolutely.
the risk in my mind is a year or two from now, we know that we're gonna be in the range of $4.7 or $4.8 million in debt for sewer. And we have reserves, and there's no right answer to any of this. It's just where you have to make a decision, and we all have to vote on it. But what if that bond rate is 5.5% or 6.5% or 7.5%? We don't know that.
Right.
And we can't gamble, we can't take risk. I think we need to take the most conservative approach today that we can see, but it's really difficult because the short-term rates, as of a 2-year rate, I think it closed today, a 2-year constant maturity treasury closed at 4.38.
Yep.
A 10-year bond closed at 3.7. I put my glasses back on. So the 10-year, we could borrow cheaper at 10-year than we can at 2. Now, if we go out into the bond market, we can't pay it off early.
Great.
We're stuck unless we go pay for some call options and some other stuff, and that drives our interest rate up, and I don't want to get into that. But the question is, if you just look at today and today only, what are we gonna do? We're making the assumption that we're gonna take a lot of money out of cash, which we have the ability to do so, and more than likely, it's gonna get better. And I think the numbers that they're showing are pretty accurate. But we still have a sewer that water that we're putting this water tower in is gonna make us buy a $10 million, and Brian's here gonna tell us about a $10 million water project over the next 3 years. So thinking about it in a vacuum, I think, is really dangerous. So the numbers you see are actual and they're good, and we don't know the end result of what's gonna happen in 2 or 3 years. So in my mind, I've been thinking about this for some time. Should we go out and get a short-term rate, plow as much cash as we can, because I'm a banker, I don't like debt. You'd think well, bankers like loans, but loans get people in trouble. So I hope this makes sense. And if I'm rambling, tell me to shut up. But this is what I have for a long time been thinking through. We can go out and take 1.79 down in a 10-year bond, and it'll probably be somewhere in the 395-ish, which is going to be cheaper than the short term.
We're also paying 5 years interest, because you're gonna have to keep
Yeah,
that locked open for
We're
5
stuck,
years.
yeah, we have to pay it.
You're
We're
stuck.
But that leaves $1 million, whatever that number was, after,
$1.7 million.
in your cash balance in 2002.
Back one more slide, Lindsay.
Yeah, you're looking for the,
We're
Cash funding
over at $1.423 million that we keep to put down on a sewer. So if that sewer rate was 6%, we are geniuses. If the sewer rate's 2%, we're idiots. That's what it comes down to, and that's the decision that we have to make.
And it's
But I want to make sure you all understand that to make this decision. There's no right answer. We just have to say, I vote on this, and that's what we're going to get.
Well, we didn't have our crystal ball on March 1st, and we don't have it tonight.
Never will with
This
interest
is,
rates.
right. So, if we would have made a decision on March 1st, we would have probably just moved on and not thought about it, but we're still thinking about it and talking about it. It looks to me like staff with advice is coming up, this last page is the recommendation, correct? Is that my understanding? This is the recommendation.
The 2-year, I think, is
Yeah.
Yeah.
the 2-year no payment,
I'm just curious,
100% funding.
I'm not the banker here. There's an accountant and
I'm just curious what
Two
the
bankers
city,
here,
what
so,
the city
but I feel
thinks
like
we
we
can
need to-
afford to put down on cash on that. What is the net available cash?
Let's make sure that we don't talk over one another. That's okay. Go ahead, Laura Lee.
oh, no, I was just saying, I've done a lot of things, but two bankers and an accountant probably have more ideas on this. I just feel like we should make a decision tonight and not belabor it, since we've had a lot of time to contemplate it already.
And you were saying, Mr. Partridge, I apologize for interrupting.
No, I'm sorry. I just want to know what the city would recommend if, what our net available cash would be.
I mean, we ran a scenario with a 500,000 down payment, so to speak, to buy down that debt. And I don't know if we still have that scenario to show what the potential interest savings would have been on just issuing another 2-year temp note that was callable within 12 months,
You had to save 40,000,
40,000.
a decrease of 40, so you're right above 100,000 in interest costs.
I think it just speaks to why these things are so important, is just the margins here cost, numbers with a lot of zeros at the end of them.
Yep.
So, I'm happy with the work the city's done, and I'm happy with the recommendation. I'm just curious if we do know kind of just what the city wants to put down, and then what the final number would be, but other than that, I'm okay.
I'd like to put down as much as possible. I'm not sure about the 2 versus 10. I don't know if I want to saddle this body 10 years from now. And like Chris said, there's no right answer.
No, really, it's, I think to my own personal household, and we've got a washing machine we need to get now, but we know we're gonna need the new car in 2 years. And so the idea is, do you pay the cash on the washing machine now and prepare for the car later and pay a higher interest rate when the car loan comes around? Or do you find some way to try and blend the two, keep your cash, finance the washing machine now, and then put that cash that you use on the washing machine into the car payment, or the down payment rather, on the car in the future? So that is, that's a crystal ball thing. But I think for me, it paying this off, this is a small chunk, comparatively speaking, and getting it paid off and getting it behind us, and then, realizing the revenues from it as quickly as possible, that's free of any debt, I think makes some sense.
Yeah, I like that the recommendation is, it'll mature in March of 2025. And we're looking at local options for financing. I mean, it seems like a reasonable approach, considering everything that you talked about, all the unknowns out there. But I think the information about our large customer is pretty solid moving forward, that they'll be good consumers and good customers.
And what do you recommend, Chris?
I vote with the people that vote.
So,
I'm really concerned with the interest rates 2 and 3 years from now. But it's so screwed up, and it's been a while since we've been in this environment. I think if we're going to take the approach of the 2-year, it's gonna make you pay that in 2 years. And if we don't, we're gonna have that saddled on top of sewer bonds.
Yep.
So we need to get rid of it in 2 years or less. And I think the local banks, I hope, I don't know this, that they may not even, they're gonna bid, I know they will. But, and they would probably just let us pay it off anytime we want,
Yeah, right.
so we can pay $50 a week if we wanted to.
We had a client here on the west side of the metro, did just that. We had $1 million that went out, they asked for a 12-month call. It came back from a local bank, and the comment from them was, pay it off anytime you want to. We're a local bank, we support the city.
And that's what we used to, well, I shouldn't say we, my name's on probably half the temporary notes that sit here between 2000 and 2000, on the lending side.
There you go, yeah.
So
You've seen it before.
the locals really want to help the city do good, and
Right.
I really
Right.
think that's important for us to be involved in that. So I think we need to make that commitment, that we're gonna get rid of this thing in 2 years, knowing that our risk on that new loan, the new bonds coming up, because we can't finance those in cash. There's no way we'll be able to build new sewers with cash. And with the risk that we're taking tonight is that couple extra million that we're gonna pay off now instead of then may cost us 10%. I don't think it will.
Right.
If you go out and look at the futures, I mean, they're all screwed up.
Yeah.
So I think we need to make sure we get out of it in 2 years.
Agreed. Mr. Partridge, recommendation?
My recommendation?
Yeah.
I'd like to see us, I actually don't hate the 10-year bond, but if we're gonna do the 2-year, I think, if we keep the total, I'd like to keep it under 1.5 million. That'd be my recommendation, for what it's worth.
If you all will match, I'll donate my city council salary to get it paid quicker.
I've donated that 10 times over already.
That's a different interest bracket right there.
Okay, do you feel like you have a clear direction, or what, you want an up and down vote?
Well, there's no specific motion.
Right.
So Matt, you're suggesting that the city share of costs for the temp note be only the part that's financed is 1
Again,
million.
I trust the city to come up with the right number.
We're gonna get back to the RFPs with rate, and that's gonna be, that's not gonna be tiered based on the loan amount.
Right.
You
But
know,
no,
there-
It'll be a set.
So we can decide, okay, yeah, we'll take that bank, throw a couple 100,000, get it down to 1.5.
Gotcha, yeah. No, I would recommend going forward with the city's recommendation.
We all agreed? Consensus? All right. Way to collaborate, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, on to,
And that's a big dishwasher, by the way.
Mr. Porter, I
Still
apologize.
water involved.
I did not ask if anyone was here from the public who wanted to speak to the body. Okay.
I think we just have an observer, Mayor. So
All
we're
right,
good.
very good.
Sorry.
On the new business then, Resolution 01-2301. Consider approval of engineering services contract for the 2023 City Wastewater Treatment Plant Improvements Project Phases 1 and 1A. Mr. Brakovich.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. So Brian Kingsley with BG is here tonight. The contract that's in the agenda packet is from BG. Again, this kind of goes back into early discussions through budget work session of two larger infrastructure projects, one being the water tower we just discussed, and then the second being a two-phased expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. What we've done in the recent months is kind of update that from a phase 1 and phase 2 only to a phase 1 and a phase 1A. And the reason we did that is because we pursued KDHE's loan program, which in essence and they gave us an approval for up to 5 million. BG staff thinks we could even ask for more, but the premise of that program is that the loan rate, the interest rate on that is at 60% of whatever the prime rate is. And so, although it's not as great as a loan or a grant, it is a subprime rate on the interest. And so, when we looked at the 5 million, what we asked BG to do is we knew we had some ARPA funds, cash on hand, and if we use the ARPA funds for the soft costs, like design engineering, construction observation, how much equipment can we go buy for that 5 million that we know we're getting a preferred interest rate on? And so that's why we were able to purchase everything in phase one, and then Nathaniel Monaco with BG worked us through what additional equipment would make sense as a 1A phase to the project. And so in the agreement for the engineering and construction observation, you'll see the costs are broken up into those to address both of those projects or phases, I guess 1 and 1A. Be happy to answer any questions. It is a large contract. But as we talked about earlier, the overall cost of doubling the capacity of the wastewater treatment plant, which is what it was designed to do back when the city took steps to construct the current facility. We know that that's going to be in the $8 to $10 million ballpark, and so these first phases are about half that cost. Again, with some additional cost on the soft cost. I was going to bring it up later under the city manager's agenda, but you'll recall, or some of you may recall, that we initially went after base grant funding through the Department of Commerce. They had issued $100 million, and we didn't quite make the cut. Again, my bad joke of those impoverished communities in Johnson County finally got some financial assistance. But today they announced that they released another $50 million. Anybody that was awarded in base 1.0 is not eligible. Our current application can stay in place. The caveat there was the feedback that we got was that our submittal was strong, and the only negative remarks we had were that we met just the bare minimum match requirement. And you'll probably recall we said we'd had $1 million of our own cash to put into it to get $4 million in grant funds to have a $5 million project. So we may want to reconsider that. Of course, like a lot of things, it's on a tight time schedule. Applications will have to be submitted by the end of January, and they're probably not going to make any selections. Their date is before March 14th. If it plays out like the first one did, that it was, I think, 30 days or more after what they had initially announced as a target date. So that could still be an option. And so I know I got a little off topic from the agreement, but what we try to do is mitigate as much risk for the city as we can. Going back just for a second to the water tower, we know that's over a $3 million investment. Getting the EDA grant to cut $1.5 million to reduce the burden to taxpayers, and then having users on the end that can pay for their own infrastructure upgrades. Plus, we were able to oversize that particular piece of infrastructure so we can extend for additional development along that corridor. This is no different. We have a little bit of a time constraint on this project because we know that as our big utility user in our industrial park comes online, we're going to be right at capacity. So we want to ensure that we have no issues there, but we also want to be in compliance with KDHE. So we've got to get this project rolling, and part of that is getting these design costs. But embedded in that is if we choose to update our application for the base 2.0 grant, a lot of this information is going to be readily available to update our application quickly. So Dan, Brian, if I missed anything that you want to add, feel free, or council, if you have any questions for staff or Mr. Kingsley, we'd be happy to answer that as well.
Mr. Kingsley, did you have more to add?
There we go. You guys hear me? I'm just here tonight to answer any questions in case, I think you're down to a point where the focus of your discussion is more on financing than it is on, the nuts and bolts of what you're wanting to construct, what you need to construct to stay in compliance with KDHE, but I'm just here to answer questions.
Brian, what do you think? I mean, you're seeing costs on a weekly basis or even probably daily basis, and I don't see that costs are going down, maybe a few items. But what are you guys projecting out that we're gonna be looking at costs when we start into this thing in a couple of years? Really when we're, not the technical work and the compliance work, but the meat and potatoes where we're pouring concrete and we're building and whatever else we're building.
Yeah, I'd like to think that inflation is gonna slow.
I hope the
We
Fed
saw,
if the Fed can get in front of it.
Right.
So far, they're unsuccessful.
I think that, cost of construction index is the same crystal ball that you're looking at with interest rates. It's hard to tell, if costs increase in that 25 to 50% again, it's gonna be a completely different landscape for a lot of folks with utility rate structures and everything. Municipal rate structures throughout my career, though, have really, and I say municipal rate structures, I'm talking about water and sewer, have not increased at the same rate as cost of energy and some of the other things, natural gas and other utilities that are in communities. But I don't think that that's an excuse for more inflation in those areas. I think that what goes on in the economy, if we do have a recession, we could be looking at prices lower than what we've estimated here. We've seen that in the past. So I guess I'm answering your question kind of like a politician. I'm not giving you a clear answer, but I've tried to look into that crystal ball, and I think I see I see costs pretty stable for the next 6 months to a year, partially because we're looking at a recession. There's not as much work that's going to be out there as what has been in the recent past, but it's all dependent on where national policy takes us, I think.
One of the things that I think we ought to be looking at is if we can apply for a grant, we need to get whatever freebies we can get. And I know we were high on the list, and we should have been. We had as good or better project than anybody else did. But what I heard you say, George, is that we maybe have to up the ante for this next round. But every time we take money from somewhere, is it coming out, what pot's it coming out of? We just talked about spending a big piece of our pot in 2 years. So we can't be taking money out of that pot to pay for something else, or we know we're not gonna be able to pay our 2-year that we just approved. We didn't approve it, I guess we recommended it.
Yeah.
So how are we gonna monitor that?
Well, I think we certainly have controls in place for it. And so the first thing I would say, it's nice to have multiple pots to choose from. And that's a position that the city of Tonganoxie has not been in the recent decades, or as far as our research can tell. So that's a good position to be in. What we like to bring to you as a recommendation is carefully selecting what pots we dip into, because some of them are more restrictive in terms of what we can use those funds to go out and purchase. And, in the sense of water or sanitary sewer, knowing what some projections are for revenue increases can help justify some of the recommendations we're making. So the other thing that's kind of been a wild card for us is the high performance of sales tax. And that's why we're seeing our own infrastructure sales tax combined with, again, our share of the county funds that are remitted to us be strong performers. And that's why you see those large balances. And those two funds, or the sales tax funds in particular, aren't subject to fund balance goals or restrictions. And again, there is on the use, but we feel pretty confident that that combination of making good decisions about how we use cash on hand, coupled with that not yet realized but comfortably projected new utility revenue, is going to leave us in that strong position. And so, the big things that we try to check off are, do we know what the cost is for sure? To kind of go back to your earlier question about cost creep or price fluctuations, on equipment. The last year or so that we've been talking to Thaniel, his concern wasn't that so much, it was the lead time. It's like, hey, when you get the funds and you're ready to go, let's start ordering this stuff, because it's gonna be 8 to 10 months in some cases before this stuff shows up. And so, or if it comes early, do you have a place to store it until we get the construction stuff in place? So those answers are all yes as well, but hopefully, I know I kind of got long-winded there, but I think I should have answered your question with, the pots are good, we've got a few to choose from, and, we just have to stay conscientious of it. And we know that there's a list of other projects that we've identified as we develop CMIP. Again, I've been here almost 6 years now. This is the first time we're really putting together a 5-year, 10-year, or even further outlook for CMIP. And we spent a lot of time the last 3 years talking about how difficult it is for policymakers such as yourselves to have to make an investment in infrastructure as a legacy project, because people don't see sewer pipes and they don't see water pipes and they don't know where that is. And so trying to explain how you were good stewards of tax dollars and spent $10 or $11 million to ensure that Tonganoxie is in a position to grow for the next 20 years without creating any additional burden. That's kind of the message we carry. That's the water we carry back to folks, is have confidence that that's what this is doing, and that these, it's money well spent. And as Dan and I always joke with each other when we're looking at, water and sanitary sewer, it's that old adage of you got to spend a little money to make a little money. And that's what it comes down to. And, the ability for us, again, to control rates, have a good rate structure that's affordable back to the residents, those are all things that are important to control and all factor into the decisions that we're talking about.
The only thing I might add is the timing element of this larger wastewater treatment plant project is actually really well situated with our existing debt. So the existing debt, which was a combination of the current facility, was issued several years ago and has been refinanced, but in 2026, for the first time, we see a significant drop-off on our annual principal and interest requirements for utility debt on the books today. And that structure isn't really good if you don't have a next project in the queue, because it's not smooth and it's not easy to design rates to accommodate those costs. But in our case, we have a multi-year construction project lined up, ready to be initiated here in the short term, and in less than 2 years, we'll have much more additional capacity to finance that debt with current rates, not even needing to raise rates. So that is one piece of the equation that helps a lot, and that in 2 years, we'll commence paying on sort of phase 2 of the plant debt and the very last bit of phase 1 costs. So while we're locked into those existing obligations for a few more years until a call date, those rates are obviously lower and at a different time frame and interest rate picture than we are today. But it does offer us some flexibility in addition to what we normally would be by that drop-off occurring in 2 years. And it's significant. It's over $250,000 a year in the design of that amortization schedule. So it's pretty interesting how that was done the last time it was refinanced.
I don't have any questions, and I thought that the previous explanation of how the initial design way back when of the water treatment facility here was very planful and anticipated future growth. I thought it was super interesting. So
The one additional thing I wanted to share is, I think, a good follow-up to Laura Lee's comments is, in the research for all this, Mr. Porter, who probably missed his true calling as a detective, was able to find the document back from 2002 when this current wastewater treatment plant facility was built. And we had the city had approximately 3.3 million in that project. And so I'm sure 21 years ago, that was a big bite to take. But if you look at it, it bought 20 years worth of development time. And now we're at that point of, we're ready to double that capacity because whether it's industry related or rooftops, this community's growing, and that is a fantastic issue to have to address.
The only thing I might add, I've been to many council meetings in my multiple tenures as an engineer, and you have a unique scenario here where you have growth that's funding these improvements. You can't believe how many communities I go into that don't have the growth, don't have the increased revenue to retire the debt in a reasonable way without just doubling or tripling sewer rates or water rates sometimes. So as you're struggling with these problems, I guess one of my observations is you've got the better scenario compared to some of your neighboring communities.
You're lucky.
Anything else? Thank you, Brian. Council, any discussion on that, on the topic, or are we ready to make a motion?
I can make a motion. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve Resolution 012301 to approve engineer services contract for the 2023 City Wastewater Treatment Plant Improvement Project Phases 1 and 1A.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Partridge. Can we do a roll call vote on this, please?
Yes, Mayor. Mr. Partridge?
Aye.
Ms. Stevens?
Aye.
Mr. Donnelly?
Aye.
Mr. Dale?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on to item B, report on Axon body camera equipment and data storage agreement renewal for police department. Mr. Porter, I think this one is yours.
Thanks, Mayor. Yes, I'm happy to introduce it. Chief Lawson prepared an agenda statement that is included in the packet. You'll remember our last meeting, he brought forward a request for approval for a somewhat similar related 5-year lease on the equipment, again, offered through Axon for the separate issue of the tasers and the licensing and training for those taser equipment. We also utilize Axon for body cameras that are utilized by our operators out in the field, by our officers out in the field. And we do pay, since 2017, an annual license fee for those cameras and the cost of the data to keep record of those incidents for either a period of time or forever, depending on the severity of the interaction that's being recorded. The yearly expenditure paid over the past 5 years was a flat amount of $10,463,044. In reviewing the contract, which was approved prior to Chief Lawson's hire by the city, he did determine that we have a reduced level of storage capacity needs, and we've currently have excess in each of the 5 years. Thus, his renewal quote was adjusted down to $9,607.68 a year. We don't anticipate considering or recommending that you consider looking for another product. This vendor is one of a select few vendors in this field. They've performed admirably in working with them, and there is some advantage to, there's some significant advantage to maintaining the same equipment and the same storage capacity we have today. I do show this as a request for a motion in the agenda statement, but as it's an extension of a current contract for another term, you could also have the option just to give us consensus to move forward with staff executing the contract, separate of a motion and a vote. But we'll put that up to your consideration. Happy to take any questions you might have about this.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Are there any questions for the city staff? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I would make a motion, we approve the Axon contract of $48,038.40, which equates to $9,607.68 a year.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Consider approval of payment of 2023 League of Kansas Municipalities membership fee. Mr. Porter.
Thank you, Mayor. This item is one that we do typically bring forward at the first meeting of the year we've been invoiced by the League of Kansas Municipalities for their services for 2023. The city is assessed a membership fee based on a base charge, a subscription charge for Kansas Governing Journal, and also a per capita and per assessed valuation formula that communities across the state are rated by and thus charged. And you can see that broken down in the invoice document. What I would like to point out is the benefits the city receives for this membership fee. During COVID in particular, the city took great levels of assistance, probably unprecedented, in legal services and advice as we navigated the COVID-19 pandemic impacts. As an employer with our employees and in our interactions with the public, changes to things that made things like remote meetings for public meetings or issues with court and other in-person services. So that has been tremendously helpful as sort of a one-off circumstance. But in addition to that, I'd also point out that our recent adoption of the Standard Traffic Ordinance and the Uniform Public Offense Code are publications prepared by the League of Kansas Municipalities staff, and the guide that you all saw when you adopted that a couple meetings ago is prepared by them as well. So we do incur some annual benefits in addition to the training offerings and other things. If the City Council has any particular areas of interest, you're also eligible to participate in trainings or webinars or other things, so please let us know if we can ever identify training materials, either written or, like I said, in person or webinar style, that we could offer for you, because we too take advantage of those periodically. But happy to take any other questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Any questions for, I'm sorry, any questions for city staff? If not, I would accept a motion at this point.
I'll make a motion to approve payment of the 2023 League of Kansas Municipalities membership fee in an amount not to exceed $3,325.98.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Partridge. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes. Item D is the annual gap waiver. Mr. Porter?
Thank you, Mayor. In this case, this is another recurring item, and we do bring it forward to the first meeting of the year in recent years, just so we don't lose track and forget to take action before the end of the year. So we are well ahead of schedule in this case. In municipalities in the state of Kansas, KSA 75-1120A requires municipalities as default to use generally accepted accounting principles in the annual preparation of financial statements and reports. Cities of less than, I guess what you'd call a large size or scale, do have the opportunity, though, to elect to waive the GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles acronym is called GAAP, to elect to take a waiver from that requirement, and that has been the practice of the city in each of the previous years that I've been able to review. Those waivers permit the municipality to prepare financial statements on a basis of accounting demonstrating compliance with cash basis laws and the budget laws of the state. The waiver shows that financial statements prepared in conformity with GAAP accounting are not relevant to the requirements and of no significant value in preparation of our financial statements. Every year when we conduct our annual audit, we do ask our auditors to reevaluate whether or not that's something that they believe, based on either findings or just discussion, ought to be reconsidered and not taken in the future year. And this last year, in the fall of 2022, we did receive the same answer that no, they feel this is sufficient and the waiver is appropriate. But it is your decision. And so the waiver is proposed with Resolution 0123-02, and it covers 2023's fiscal year. We've already, like I said, waived 2022 and previous years. Happy to take any questions I can help with.
Any questions for Mr. Porter? Thank you, Dan.
No, I'm sure your auditor will be pleased.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm sure that it's easier to audit when they don't do GAAP, when they do cash. It's easier.
Gotcha. Okay, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the resolution 123-02, waiving the GAAP requirement for 2023.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Presentation of the 2023 budget book. I see that I have one here on my desk. Mr. Porter?
Thank you, Mayor. Everyone at the dais should have a printed copy of the draft budget book. This budget book is a conclusion of the litany of discussions held starting as early as the spring of 2022 through our adoption, which took place on September 6th of last year. We held many budget work sessions and many discussions with community organizations, with department directors, and with you as the city council. And the budget is really intended to be a communications tool, and thus we prepare this booklet. We print a few copies, but we've actually seen in recent years a trend towards people requesting digital copies or viewing our digital copy on the website. We do have the ability with our website platform to collect statistics on viewing and popularity, and it's interesting to see throughout the year, periodically there'll be weeks or months that we get an alert that so many people have looked at our budget book and spent this long looking at it. It doesn't tell us who those people are, but it's just interesting to know that it is being utilized and viewed. And so if there's a way for us to share total views, I think that's something we'll add to the discussion with you all so you can understand a little bit more about what kind of scale people are using it in. What we have prepared for you tonight is a mostly complete budget book document. There are a few sections with additional context being added, and we do anticipate that we could have that all complete in time to be printed by the official publisher version for your next city council meeting later in January. If you have any edits or read through it and have any questions or concerns, if you could let us know by next Monday or so, that's when we're targeting sending it to the printer. And we can always make changes to the digital version, but once the printed copies are bound, we don't typically reprint those through the year. So we try to have as good of a starting point as possible. Any questions or suggestions would be much appreciated too.
Okay. Can't wait to take a look. Item F, city manager agenda. Anything for tonight, Mr. Brekovich?
I had already touched on the base grant 2.0, but I'd be remiss if I didn't try to recognize Lloyd Wisdom, who worked his last day for the city. He was grinning ear to ear as he headed into retirement. But it's not often that a small community has a 27-year employee, and Lloyd will be greatly missed. He was a valuable asset and took great pride in the work he did. And you know, they now that I'm getting older myself, I can say they just don't make people like that anymore. So, in case he ever hears this, we'll miss you, Lloyd.
Yes, I saw him today, and he was a happy man. Item G, city attorney agenda. Ms. Kirstelich? Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem agenda.
I have no items tonight. Thank you.
City council, anybody have any agenda items?
Just a question, George, what, or Dan probably, whoever, what rate are we getting on our deposits now? Because we should have seen significant increases on our deposits, so our interest income should be going up.
It is, yeah, and it is, at the end of 2022, our rates at our accounts has increased significantly. I could prepare a summary if you'd like.
I'd like to
We can add it to the financial report if that would be okay, next meeting.
Thank
Thank you.
And could you, I have a short executive session.
Sure. And I want to confirm that our next meeting is on a Tuesday again after Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Okay, thank you. I move that the city council recesses into executive session to discuss the city manager's annual review process pursuant to the personnel matters of non-elected personnel, exception KSA 75-4319B1. The open meeting will resume in city council chambers at at 8:18 p.m. And it will include city council and the city attorney by phone and, no, not the city attorney.
Oh, she is? Okay,
Okay,
great.
city attorney by phone, no, okay, that's it.
Right. We've got city
Oh,
manager.
it's a motion. That's a motion.
We got city manager and assistant city manager in there.
That's a question. Do you all
It
join?
should have.
Okay, and city manager and assistant city manager.
Okay.
Okay.
I second.
Second, thank you, Mr. Dale. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're in executive session.
Okay.
Okay, it's 8:18, and that ends our executive session. Let the record show that no binding action was taken in the executive session. Mr. Dale,
I would like to take this moment to make a motion that we adjourn.
is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Partridge. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed,
You take
go
way
state.
too much pride in that.